I guess I'll pick it back up with, so we can talk about Darius, right? To kind of kick us off. So, right, his changes are less heal per target, higher maximum heal when you hit 3 targets, right? So bigger disparity, and scaling mana cost, right? So when we play tested, still dunked his top lane, right? Still felt like he was really strong, but actually kind of stalled out in some mid-game fights, right? Like when he wasn't hitting the max people decimates, and he was just kind of tossing them out. That guy's mana is not very good, and you don't really build it, actually.
Yeah, that's actually really big. I think the mana cost is really, really easy to overlook, but is actually a massive, massive change. You max it first. So essentially, instead of putting the patch note said, the mana cost went up by 40%, because for most intents purposes, that's what happened, actually, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't buy mana items. You actually very rarely go flask on him. You don't buy a Frozen Heart on the guy because of the new itemization stuff. You used to back in the day, but like there's not even room for Triforce anymore because you want attack damage so much.
Yeah, for me, it just looked like, was nowhere near as dominant as it is right now. And especially, I think there's some interesting characters like Shen, people that can just sustain really well, that now you can actually just outlast him, right? Because at some point, he's going to have to go back.
Well, and what's really cool is I think that this fits very well with my idea of Darius, which is that he's supposed to be this super big lane bully. He's supposed to get ahead, and he needs to use that to win, before the Fiora in our game, as the example, gets to her power spike or her late game power spike and takes the game over in the other direction.
Right.
And so I think that this change correctly, pinpoints that, where it says like, look, you were 40 CS ahead and a couple kills up. You now need to find a way to use that to your advantage before the game gets to a point where you can't sustain the
Fiora eclipses you because
because scaling. So it feels like we kind of encapsulated Darius pretty well. Feeney, I want you to tell me about the Mordekaiser ones, because of these, it's a lot harder to parse. There's a lot of moving parts here. I mean, with with Mordekaiser in general. So tell me, use words. I need to know.
People are still trying to figure out what the best way to play him is and how to sort of, work around him. And the big weakness that we chose to hit on this one was sustain. So we hit sustain on, on basically a variety of layers, right? It's like the number of minions that you can proc it off of, the overall damage went down, the health cost went up, which is basically just a flat you heal, less. 65
use
less
your
at max
combo,
range.
you will have less health than you did prior.
Exactly. So if you're trying to run into characters that are like, let's say you run like a Caitlyn Lulu lane, and you're like, let's poke him down. The hope is that now you can actually do that. Whereas before, his base sustain values were high enough that you could basically just kind of bully your way through any lane. And this character is not one that has. He has very, very stark weaknesses, which is no CC, no mobility, and he just kind of like walks at you and then hopefully can kill you.
Yeah. Then moving right along, because I don't know if we have anything else to add to that.
No, that's good.
Skarner. And Skarner's probably important to note because he was played the most of the juggernauts on 5.16, and seems to be one that a lot of my conversations, both around here and with pros, is like, Skarner is at least a known quantity heading into Worlds. We don't have to think, is he going to get picked? It's more when he's going to get picked, right? And I want to add some context here on something where 5.17, there was a change that was made to say like, hey, his early game stats for his passive went down significantly. Later, they end up evening out or being actually a little better. So that was bugged. That didn't actually happen. Instead, it actually made him pretty strong in those earlier levels. So now that change is actually happening. So not only is he losing his earlier slow, and it's just slow at all levels, he's actually losing these stats. Like, he is just not going to scrap you anywhere near as hard in the early game, which seems pretty big for pro teams. That 1 to 6 is very volatile, especially if you don't have good ganks early.
Yeah, I feel like the scrapping doesn't happen as much. I mean, like, I haven't seen a lot of pro games of Skarner, right? So like invades, but it will slow his jungle clear down, and that to me is the bigger part. Like, if you lose 10% attack speed in your jungle for half your camps, that's very relevant.
Yeah.
And so that's to me the biggest nerf.
Yeah.
Well, I think the early slow is pretty relevant too. As well,
right?
The
E for ganks.
This is a historical character who has not been able to really exert lane pressure until 6. Like once you hit 6, those ganks are deadly. But before that, you don't have a lot of influence. After the rework, you actually had a lot of influence. You were actually a very, very powerful ganker with the speed boost on shield, with like the slow followed by the stun, even before 6. Like, you throw a red buff on there, and that's pretty much that's a dead laner.
We have nerfs to Gangplank and Fiora, which have kind of been almost more contentious in professional play, right? And so my question is, are these enough, right? Because I think the degree to which people believe something like a Gangplank or a Fiora could or kind of have taken over professional play is actually pretty drastic at the moment.
Well, okay. I mean, I'll start with
Yeah.
Gangplank, which is that given the fact that we're reducing some of the armor pen, I hope it's enough. I mean, that's the thing. I don't know if it's enough. It's definitely a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
Let's also not forget the 5.17 changes as well, right? So like in 5.17, which no professional play has been on yet, we did adjustments to basically the reliability of barrels as well, right? With the increased cast time. And so some of these sort of like really tricky, almost like making barrels undodgeable for a lot of people who are very skilled with Gangplank, which there's some cool barrel play around that. But when we get a little bit more fair. So 5.17, we sort of targeted the fairness. And then 5.18, we're sort of targeting the output. And I think with those two combined, we should see some pretty noticeable results. But yeah, I agree. Currently, if you're looking at 5.16, Gangplank barrels are pretty nutty.
Right. I mean, all that being said, Gangplank's prevalence does somewhat beg for more aggressive early game top laners to be played.
Yeah.
Right? You play a Riven, don't let the Gangplank farm, and you can win the game off of that. As opposed to playing Shen, playing Maokai, and saying, well, I can't do anything about your farming, so you're going to get the gold.
He's just killing me. What do I do? It's like, we'll just stop just farming as well, right? Yeah, Darius actually does really well against him, which I think is cool that some of the characters we introduced, like Fiora beats Gangplank, and you can kind of build a rock, paper, scissors out of all the reworks that just happened.
But Fiora is still going to be, I think, Fiora late game.
Yeah.
The big difference is that in the early game, it's not going to be so much of a straight up stat check going up against her, right? Because the only thing that's changed here is base stat.
So specifically on Fiora for base stats, like this is a known quantity to some extent. We've seen the world where Fiora did not have lots of base stats. Like that was right when she shipped on 5.15, and she was terrible. She still scaled really well in the late game. She still murdered people, and her performance was overall abysmal because of how early she got dominated consistently.
Yeah.
We gave her a ton of base stats. And then we saw her go from a very unreliable early game to a dominant late game to a pretty reliable early game to a very dominant late game still.
Which is a problem.
There is some middle ground there. Right? Because we've seen both extremes. And so the goal here is let's basically pull back on those things that we know put her over the top, and we'll get her basically back to that middle ground.
And you can actually go back to, I'm going to bring up the Chinese playoffs again because this is the first time I was seeing Fiora, and I want to say it was Acorn. First game destroyed somebody, and it was like brutal. He's like against a Maokai or something. Next game, he's against a Lulu, and I think they lane swapped as well, and he never got off the ground. Pro teams, and this is pro teams versus solo queue. These are very different environments, but pro teams are really good at making your top laner be 0-4 than ending the game before they get any gold back.
Let's not just isolate to top lane either, right? I think we'll talk about a little bit later, right? But if you're talking about early game sort of dominance, like champions, we're doing some changes to the Warrior Enchant on jungle, and a lot of these sort of traditional, really powerful early game characters that can actually reliably shut down some of these characters.
Let's talk about that. How effective do you think 5 damage on Warrior
didn't
is
you see how
going
much
to be?
the nerf changed the champion pool? It did everything.
So 5 AD on Warrior, really? Are we going to start seeing all of the fighters again? I'm not so convinced. And 2 armor on Jarvan. I know that the theory behind it is with a little bit more armor, jungle clears aren't as devastating, right?
You get 20 to 50 more health.
Exactly.
Right?
You come out of lane with 20 to 50 more health. Maybe that 20 to 50 health is an extra tower hit, gets you beyond that threshold of an extra tower hit. It could actually become pretty relevant. As a jungler, being able to take an extra tower hit.
So we've actually seen really almost profound sort of adjustments to characters with very, very, especially junglers, with very, very small base stat changes. The reason is you hit these really concrete breakpoints where it's with an extra 50 health, am I going to want to gank or not? Right? And a lot of times those decision points is a huge tipping point where it's you are going to make a play that that could snowball a lane, could snowball a game, or you're just not going to try and you're just going to recall back.
And 5 AD doesn't sound like it's going to doesn't sound like it's going to do a whole lot.
But it did so much last time.
I know, but maybe it tips the scales into saying hey, maybe I'm a team that really wanted to play Rengar, right? Well, hey, 5 AD and squish your top laners, Maokai is going to have his ult up less often. These tiny little things move and say, hey, jungle clears fast enough, that guy's going to take more damage, go for it. We think we're now ready to pull the trigger on something we weren't ready to do before. I want to ask kind of a lighter question. What are you thinking is going to show up at Worlds that we haven't really talked about?
If Renekton's in the mix, I kind of just want to see the old Renekton Jax teams. Oh my God, what's happening?
Orianna's probably just going to be back, right? Azir and Victor got hit pretty recently.
Orianna and Corki, because it's Worlds.
Yeah, right.
So
That's what I'm saying.